we know what we want. We know what our business needs are. We know what sort of technologies we're looking for. Tell us how much it'll cost. How much would you charge us to build it? How long will it take? And at that point, not only the vending community has a much better idea of what they're getting themselves into, but departments also have a better opportunity to establish realistic baselines on project and schedule. That means when a proposal comes to you here in the legislature through the budget process, you're not going to get a $27 million estimate on what really should be a $96 million price tag. A couple of other things that you'll see as a result of the stage gate process: we're going to have better planned projects. We're going to have departments that will, be required to document their business needs and operational practices. We're going to have an assessment of an organization's capacity to take on a project and handle the change that it'll impose to the way they do business. And if a department isn't ready, then we're going to be able to say no. So that's just one part of it. The second part is we also looked at procurement. How does our procurement process, at least as it was when I came into office, does it work or does it actually hurt us in terms of being able to be successful with these projects? And again, what we found is that the procurement process was way too long. It took years in and of itself. It was very bureaucratic. It was fairly inflexible. It was unnecessarily limited communication between the vending community and the state. And as a result of all of those things, it often impeded competition. Vendors, as they're coming to bid on these projects, take on a great deal of cost and risk, even just in bidding. And so if we have a process that's 2 to 3 years long based on an approved project that was approved 2 to 3 years ago without a good set of documentation and requirements, they're taking on a bit of a risk as well. And then the final problem with the way that the process worked is that it wasn't tightly coupled with the ability to provide oversight from an IT perspective on these projects. It wasn't really leveraged as a means of managing risk on a project. So again, the administration sponsored legislation to transition procurement authority from the Department of General Services into my agency. So now we're responsible for running the procurements. Since we've taken over, we've done a number of different things that have made improvements to the way that the procurement process works. First and foremost, we connected it to our oversight. So now it is part of the oversight process. I just mentioned that stage gate process, right? So developing an adequate and good procurement is a very significant component to whether or not a project is going to be successful or not. We also connected it to expertise in the IT arena, right? The folks that work for me are very skilled and very experienced in running projects and understanding what's going on in the technology space. We made the process less bureaucratic. We shortened the time frames. We opened up communication during the process with the bidding community, and we made the process more flexible. So we've done things such as publish draft RFPs or draft requirements and put them out so that we can get reaction from the vending community, from the technology sector. If they can come back and say, hey, you missed something here, or we don't understand this, or you realize that technology has moved from this place to this place in the time that you've been developing this. So we put out drafts ahead of time so that we can refine our procurements so that by the time we actually go out to bid, we have a tighter and a better procurement. As a result, we've experienced more competitive procurements. The contracts that we're putting in place better protect the state and enable the departments to better manage the engagements. We've shortened the procurement cycle. I mentioned before, it was not uncommon for procurements to take 2 to 3 years, and in some cases 6 and 7 years to be completed. Since we've had procurement authority, we've completed 16 or 17 procurements. Our average time frame is just under 9 months. So that's greatly reduced the processing times. What that's also done is it's enabled more people to come and bid, more competitors to bid, because it doesn't cost them an arm and a leg to bid, and they have a better shot at it. So that's what we did on procurement. In the way of oversight, we also examined the way that our department conducted oversight and the model for it. We found that the model was inconsistent. It relied too heavily on departments doing self-oversight and relied too much on a check-the-box or throw a penalty flag sort of an engagement with projects. We found that simply doesn't work. Just being able to go to departments and say, hey, you're doing that wrong, is not enough. To be able to just cite them every time that they're not following a standard isn't enough. As I mentioned, one of the big challenges we found is departments don't have a lot of times the experience with these big projects. They need to know, okay, well, what do I do about it? So our oversight experts do actually share lessons learned. You know, one of the things that we do is whenever we do close down a project, we do an assessment of it, or we cause an assessment to be done. And we harvest lessons learned out of those. You know, we've categorized all the different sorts of issues that we see on projects, and we've culled it down to a list of about 12 pretty consistent issues that crop up over and over again. We call that list our dirty dozen. So we build lessons learned around that, and our oversight analysts actually share that with departments. So they don't just say, hey, you're messed up on your requirements, or your schedule is way out of whack. They actually share lessons learned across the portfolio. And they also refer them to resources, either internal. In some cases, they refer them to other departments and say, you know, that project actually did a really good job on developing their governance structure. You should go look at that. The other things that we did is we brought the project oversight function in-house. As I mentioned in the past, previous administrations, they would let departments do oversight on their own. So it wasn't really that independent. We actually had, in many cases, oversight being contracted out to contractors, which, you know, had a mixed level of success. They, you know, they have their expertise as well. But you're not building the capacity in an organization that needs to provide oversight on an ongoing basis. So we brought that in-house. We started to do things where I would meet with project vendors and, again, project executives on a routine monthly basis. We call them our portfolio reviews, where it's just them and myself and my leadership team, and it's the very high levels of the project. And, you know, oftentimes the business side execs of the departments, to find out what are the issues that are going on and what are we going to do to fix them. That's how we were able to bring many of the projects back online. And finally, we embedded oversight staff on big projects. So, you know, John mentioned the Fiscal project. That's an example of where we have staff, oversight staff actually embedded on the projects that are there on a day-to-day basis, attending the meetings, meeting with the vendors, meeting with the project team. And then finally, a very important aspect of making sure that we're successful, we looked at and we saw that there was a skill set gap in the IT community. We needed to build the capacity of the state's IT workforce to be better able to not only take on projects, manage contracts, manage vendor relationships, and then support these systems once they were delivered. As I mentioned, we capture and document lessons learned along the way. We share that across the board. We've developed a training program. We established an office called the Office of Professional Development. That office's job is to train the state IT workforce. So we took that list of 30 dozen issues and we built a project academy out of it. Shonda, if you have the handout, I wanted to share this with you and with the committee members. So what we've done is we've had folks come in and provide for free training classes, to the rest of the state IT community. And, Shonda will pass these out to you here, but I wanted to share with you the topics that have been covered. These classes have been going on, I think we're now at about 1.5 years now that we've been doing this. So classes on how to be an effective project sponsor, how do you effectively manage and document requirements, project schedule management, enterprise architecture management, how do you model and remake business processes that need to change, organizational change management, governance. How do you transition project, not only people and technology, but the processes as you take on a new project? And there's a whole list of them. Data conversion. These are all specifically geared at the issues that we identified as common stumbling blocks. State staff teach them. The folks that actually teach these classes are folks that are experts that have done it here in California successfully, understanding, you know, how government works, understanding the size and scope of the issues that we're dealing with here in California. To date, we've had, I think, close to 1,700 folks participate in these training classes. They're held right here in Sacramento. If folks can't come to them, then we videotape them, and those are made available to folks online. So if you're a new person coming into a project, you know, you have to miss the one on how do you manage a project schedule. You can go online and watch the whole presentation complete with all the handouts. The other thing that we've done is we've leveraged the expertise of the tech sector in Silicon Valley. and their innovation as well. So we partner with the tech sector on educational forums. These are usually 1 or 2 day forums where we say to the private sector, to the technology firms into Silicon Valley, bring us your best and brightest and teach our state people about whatever the particular topic is. As an example, we've had forums, a couple of them now, on effective project delivery. We've had forums on cybersecurity, on cloud computing, on data analytics, on mobile technologies, on how do you function effectively as a CIO. We call that our CIO Academy. And again, the idea is to build up the capacity within the state for taking on these projects. Again, even with all that training, even with the sharing of lessons learned, you're going to run into projects or situations where departments just simply don't have the expertise in-house. So the other thing that we've done, we established a consulting strike team. Essentially what we did is we set up a division within Caltech of experts in different discipline areas, in the area of contract management, governance, organizational change management, quality assurance and quality control, risk and issue management, test management, data management, implementation of new systems, interface management, requirements management, and schedule management. So these are folks that work for me that have long experience. A lot of them actually came out of the private sector. That are experts in this field. Those folks are available, and we loan those out to departments as they run into challenges on projects. They're short-term engagements, but they go there and help departments. They actually roll up their sleeves and get them over the hump. And then finally, to your question, Senator Berryhill, what are we doing to make sure that we have and build this capacity to manage projects in-house? Last year, through the budget process, we went before the legislature with a request to establish a project management office, an actual office where we can build up a cadre of professionals whose whole job is to manage projects. And the idea is that these folks will manage projects on behalf of departments that have a significant business need for technology, but just not the capacity to do it themselves. It's a very deliberate move to create a cadre or a place where somebody can go and have a career in project management, where you can retain them 5 to 10 years because they'll have a career path and a career ladder. So the legislature was kind enough to agree with us. They gave us 4 positions to kind of set up the framework for it. We produced a report that came to the legislature about a month and a half or 2 months ago. And in the spring, you're going to be seeing a budget request to now actually staff this office up. The idea behind it is that we'll be able to actually provide training or provide effective project management and help manage projects for departments that can't take it on. I'll wrap my comments up because I know I'm going long. Just by saying this, we came in, we were very aggressive, we were proactive, we're being accountable on, taking the hits for projects that we shut down, and trying to get projects that were off track back on track. But we've done a lot, and we've done it in a short period of time. Unfortunately, all of the projects that we saw in the audit, all of the projects that are in the write-up are projects that were started, years ago under a different set of decision makers, under a different set of processes, and under a different oversight and management model that doesn't really work, right? We've done what we can as an administration to update and modernize those processes. But I also want to kind of provide a little bit of balance here. We're spending a lot of time and attention focusing on the projects that have failed and that have challenged. But California actually does, in fact, deliver technology, even with the models that we had before. I have one more handout for you here. What we did is we said, okay, let's go take an inventory of the projects that have actually been implemented just in the last 4 or 5 years. We came up with almost 200 of them. These are projects that are in production, that are supporting programs today. And the reason I want to bring that out is because, I don't expect any headlines in the B or, I see the camera has left. So I know we're not going to get, they're not going to cover the good stuff. But, I don't want to be in another hearing where people, or in another reporter stick a microphone in my face and say, okay, here it is, California, home of the Silicon Valley, and government never gets things right. That's simply not true. We do get things right, and there's an example. There's a list of just about 200 different systems just in the last 4 or 5 years that have been implemented that document that. With that, I'll stop.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. Thanks for the
questions you have,
for the update and the input on that. The changes that you brought to Caltech, they started and evolved over the last few years. report and the audit that the auditor just conducted does show some findings, key findings,
Sure.
that indicate still some problems with the corrective actions from sponsoring agents. Troubled is insufficient. The guidance for using the procedures when to escalate issues to Caltech's management are outdated and not currently in use. Has no criteria for the conditions that will trigger to a considerable. How do you respond to those concerns and findings in the audit? And then I will ask the auditor if what Mr. Ramos just said kind of fits into what or Mr. Byers, what you found, and how the difference there, if there is
Sure.
one.
So I think overall, they made recommendations that we fundamentally said, okay, those make sense. We'll do those about documenting issues that we find or our meetings, about establishing or at least documenting guidelines. I think we actually do have guidelines, and we actually follow those very carefully and judiciously when suspending or terminating a project. In our response to the auditor, we actually included those criteria, but we said, fine, we'll document them. But I would point out to a couple of things. The decision to suspend or terminate a project doesn't rest with the oversight staff. That decision rests with me. And so we make those decisions very carefully and very judiciously, and we don't do it often because they bring their own set of problems. But I'll go over those specific criteria here. They're documented, like I said, in our
That's okay. In the interest of time, we don't have to go through each one, but my concern is I thought I heard at the hearing last week, or maybe it was Monday, I don't remember, the issue of, or at least a discrepancy in understanding of your authority to terminate a project, that there was a sense that your level of authority and control over these IT projects was not followed or not understood by the Department of Technology.
I won't speak for the auditor, but here's what I thought I heard. Was not that we don't understand our authority, because I can clearly tell you I certainly understand, and I've actually exercised it not many times, but a few times. Actually, on the two projects that they thought we didn't do a good enough job, the State Controller's project and the DV project, I exercised it in both those cases. We terminated one, we suspended the other one. As I mentioned to you in our private meeting, you don't do that stuff just willy-nilly. There's often contracts that are involved. There's a dispute resolution process in a contract that has to be followed. Otherwise, you expose the state to legal liability and contractual liability. So we broke those projects, or we stopped them at key points. In the case of the DMV project, we stopped it at a point where we thought, okay, there's two sides to a project. We're going to let them finish the first half of the project, and then we're going to stop it before we move on to the second half. They did complete the first half of the project. We paid for that. We got it. It's in production. DMV is using that part of the system today. The second part of the project, we stopped. We didn't pay for that. It's not in use. The contractor actually gave us a rebate on money that had been, some work that had been done in anticipation that never got used. So in my opinion, that was the right point at which to stop. We didn't get into a lawsuit. We didn't get into a place where, contractors and the state are fighting it out. Same thing happened on the State Controller's project. There was a dispute resolution process that had to be followed. We allowed the controller and worked with the controller's office to follow that resolution process. They worked with the contractor till they got to the point where the contractor basically was unwilling to perform per the terms of the contract. The controller's office essentially fired the contractor, and we said, okay, that's the appropriate time to suspend the project. If we had done it sooner, we would have jeopardized the dispute resolution process and, again, subjected the state to legal liability.
Okay, let me thank you, and let me move on. Mr. Byers, if you could respond to
Sure.
Mr. Ramos's comments, and then if you have a question, Senator. Yeah, of course.
So I think it's a good point about when to suspend or terminate a project, and like Mr. Ramos said, in Caltech's response, it included the conditions that it says would result in a termination. They weren't shared with us during the audit, and even if they were, what we would have said and what we said in response to providing us providing those items is that they are very obvious situations where you would suspend or terminate a project. For example, if fraud is involved or the technology is outdated, that's pretty obvious. But what we're looking for, and our recommendation asks for, is is to provide more high-level guidance for the situations that require more judgment, that aren't just the obvious black or white situations. There's a lot of gray areas in IT development where suspension or termination might be the path that you're going down, and you might want to at least threaten it, because that threat, if used judiciously, like we say in our report, can bring about change. The other side of that, too, is that before you even get to suspension or termination, when projects start to have problems, Caltech has the authority under law to impose remedial actions on a project. So what we asked Caltech is, what are those remedial actions that you would apply? And Caltech doesn't have a definition of those remedial actions other than what's in the law. And so what we're looking for the IPO analysts, they need a toolbox of knowing what they can or can't do when a project gets in trouble. What sort of items can they take and recommend it to Caltech management to say, hey, we want to impose this remedial action on a project. And having those defined and having those outlined for the staff to use and to help guide those judgments will add more consistency in the process and better equip the IPO analyst on the ground.
Okay.
If I could add to that, Senator.
Yes, of course.
And I agree with John 100%. The other issue that we have with respect to the state controllers, it's the time, as I indicated in my comments, it's the timing of when they intervene. So the state controllers project, the state had already spent over $260 million before this project was suspended or terminated. The issue we had on Breeze was IPO and IV&V didn't get started until a year in, but 9 months before the state signed a contract with Accenture, the IPO analysts and the IV&V experts had already identified issues that were significant enough to, in our view, require Caltech or suggest that Caltech, it's like, we don't even want to sign a contract with this vendor until we address some of these issues, because they're already significant enough for us to say, we don't want to sign on the dotted line. So let's not wait until it's getting so bad and we've spent a significant amount of money then to decide to suspend or terminate. So I think another issue that we have is the timing. As John was indicating, or Mr. Byer was indicating, we need to put pressure on the agencies and hold the agencies accountable to fix issues that the IPO analysts and the IV&V experts are identifying. Again, if you have one particular issue, that may not be significant enough, but our IT expert, in looking at those IPO reports and those IV&V reports, are saying collectively there are enough significant issues here where we need to pause or we need to put pressure on this department and the vendor to fix these problems before the state's willing to spend any more money on this project. So I think that's some perspective that needed to be shared.
So the timing issue is what we're hearing, and I'm sure Mr. Ramos hears that. And
sure. So let me address a couple of the issues.
Very
that
briefly,
brought up.
please.
I will. I'll try. I'll try. I guess first, in terms of the criteria for suspending a project, we actually did share it with them. They asked us to document it in writing, so we shared it with them at the when they allowed us to view the draft of the report, and we documented it.
I guess what I'm hearing, though, without getting into the details,
sure.
is the message is you have to interject yourself in an early stage
sure.
and be aggressive to solve the problem.
So let me talk about that as well. We do that. In fact, we did that.
I think that's all we want to hear.
Okay.
Is it that you are doing
Short
it
and
and that
sweet.
you will continue to do it. That's great. Thank you.
you go.
Senator Berryhill.
I guess I want to congratulate you. It seems like since a year ago in Sub 4 that you are moving and making progress in some of these problems and trying to streamline some of this stuff to happen. I understand that your Department of Technology is currently conducting an independent assessment of the 21st Century Project. Are you going to be back in front of Sub 4 talking about this stuff again this year?
The assessment?
Yeah.
Well, a good deal of that depends on the committee's interest in it. I mean, the project is suspended and there's a lawsuit going on, so I don't think there's any budget actions before the committee. There may be. I know that there's some requests for funding to continue the litigation. But if you're asking, are we going to be sharing the results of our assessment, we're more than happy to do that once it's public. But as far as I know, we haven't been asked or called to any Sub 4 hearings. But we're happy to do it. If
you don't have anything to share with us about what the status of that is? Or?
Oh, I can tell you now what the status. The assessment is underway. It's a 3-part assessment that we're doing. The first part of the assessment is to understand, okay, it's going to break up into 3 different areas, and the first part of the assessment is underway now. The assessment is looking at the first part is looking at what it would it take to actually complete the project. Because one of the contentions that the contract vendor has made is, hey, just bring us back and we'll finish out the project. We could have finished it. The controller is not in that position, and so the controller wants to know, okay, and we want to know, okay, is this the right technology for the purpose, and what does it take to finish that out? That assessment is underway today. It's not complete, but as soon as it's finished, I'm more than happy, we can have us and the controller's office come in and share our findings.
Yeah, that's an interesting dilemma because it's such a big project that not everybody can handle it in the first place, and it's kind of a mess.
Very true.
Yeah.
I will guarantee you this, though, because as long as I'm in this chair, that project isn't going to move forward until the entire assessment is complete.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. We'll now move on to Dr. Alvarez, and I want to thank the auditor for a good report. And you'll be following up with this in 6 months then, and then annually, or every 6 months, I guess.
The follow-up process, Senator, is after we issue a report, it's a 60-day, 6-month, 1 year, and then if anything hasn't been fully implemented at that 1 year mark, we continue to monitor on an annual basis.
We'll look forward to seeing those. So thank you very much.
You want us to stay or for the next?
No, you can probably leave.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the report, and looking forward to some great successes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Alvarez, thank you very much for your patience.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Hill. I'm Rocio Alvarez. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I've been CIO for the past 15 years in the public sector. And before that, I was a faculty member at the University of Washington and the University of Massachusetts, where I taught in the business school and I taught IT management. So I've been on both sides of both the theory and the practice of managing IT. I had the pleasure of chairing the 9-member panel of very illustrious IT leaders that the controller and the governor assembled, and we put together this the report that you
did. I have it right here.
You've seen 21 recommendations. We identified maybe 10 challenges, problems, and articulated 21 recommendations to address those. We were tasked with looking at the procurement process and looking at 3 things: hire the right vendor, at the best value, and keep them accountable. And we struggled a bit to, because we were told it was the procurement process, and we didn't want to go with the narrow interpretation of procurement, and so we looked at the entire life cycle of an IT system, because the committee felt very strongly that one needs to look at the initial planning stages and not just the procurement in terms of RFP issuance and solicitation and award. And so we looked at planning and made several recommendations about the earlier stages, because we firmly believe that if you don't get the initial stages right, doesn't matter how much oversight you have later on, it really, we equated that to thinking about a bridge. If you have a bridge and you don't have a good design, it doesn't matter how much oversight you have, that bridge will fail. And so we looked
referring to the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge by any chance?
No comment. So we looked at it again. We looked at all the various phases. We made recommendations around governance and leadership, staffing, which I've heard here quite a bit about, approvals, reducing the approval process. Again, the 21 recommendations, not all recommendations were created equal. I think the ones around approval or initial approval, requiring agencies to make a very strong business case were very important to us. And it's interesting to hear Carlos Ramos talk about the assessment they did, because we found a lot of the similar findings that he did, and we worked, separate from him, and found a lot of similar challenges that he just articulated now. So I don't know if you want me, what exactly you would like me to do. I don't think, I want to subject you to going over 21 recommendations.
No, and I don't think that's necessary. But you did hear Mr. Ramos's comments and the direction that he's moving the department from when he came on board. Did you hear anything that is inconsistent with what they're doing, or have you seen anything? Have you had an opportunity to read the auditor's report?
I read it. I read the summary, and in detail. I didn't get the chance to read the lengthier one. It was given to me yesterday, so I didn't get. But I've listened here carefully.
Is there something that you kind of took away from some of the comments or from the audit report that is inconsistent, or do you think that we're moving in the right direction based on the thoroughness of, obviously, and the recommendations of your committee?